Hi, I'm Roy Collin, the host of the podcast. You can find everything about me by scanning the QR code there or going to roycollin.com, and you'll find my six podcasts: the Podfather, helping people become podcasters; the Awakening, exposing fraud and corruption but with solutions; the Crypto, all things blockchain technology; meditation podcast; speaking podcast; and the Learn Polish podcast. You can also help the show by actually making a donation, visiting the store, or helping my sponsors. I hope you enjoyed this week's show.
We like to welcome again Matt Ehret, who's a frequent friend of this platform because he always helps us be in a good discerning mind. Okay, so Matthew, for what everyone should know, just we highly encourage you to keep an eye on math in the risingtidefoundation.net, canadianpatriot.org, and the Substack. And with that, you will also find his very powerful and lovely wife, who also is an author, and they both have a great relationship in terms of not just between themselves but also with the audience and the people they want to serve in fact they've just been traveling, and I'll let Matthew continue his story and his experiences, their experiences, especially in their latest travels. And if you are a very visual person, trust me, you can never run out of materials if you just search Matthew Ehret, Cynthia Chong, and you'll find a lot of videos. And for me, that will be a contribution for a lifetime for the future. So, Matthew, welcome again, and thank you.
Aw, shucks, Grace. Yeah, your opening messages are just wonderful. Yeah, thank you for having me back on, guys. I always enjoy these little chats. And you're right. I mean, Cynthia and I, we just did a little bit of a cross Canadian tour. We had a four different speaking engagements in Alberta and Ontario, and we had a lot of really great meetings. We spoke in Alberta to networks of political activists, as well as some people who were engaged in holding seats in the provincial government, which was good. And in Ontario, I was invited by my friend Tish Conlon, who's an activist with the People's Party of Canada. It's sort of like the a variation of the MAGA movement, the only expression of it as a party in Canada, run by a former cabinet minister, Maxime Bernier, who and she asked me to give a little speech at one of their rallies, so I did that, and I opened up for Maxime Bernier, so that was good. A lot of great responses. We 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 invited people to our events afterwards, where we got to go in deep into the occult secret societies shaping world history. And hey, I know you.
Yeah, we've been colleagues, I guess, for years because I've also been writing for the Fortress News.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, we've been sort of like two ships at the sea, kind of like in parallel, and
Yeah,
we've
yeah,
never actually directly crossed paths vocally, like in live time. So I'm really
yeah,
happy. This is great.
yeah,
See,
yeah. Me too. Me too.
that's our surprise for you. I know you'll be happy
Yeah,
to have
yeah.
Drago
I
with
mean,
us,
I've always known about Matt. Of course, his work is well known in our world, and it's really great to be here. I'm sorry for interrupting. I had some issues with the with the with my camera and the microphone and the hardware in general. For some reason, whenever I try to enter, through StreamYard, it just blocks my camera and microphone. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Well, and Drago, yeah, just so people know, if anybody watching doesn't know, Drago's writings on geopolitics is fantastic. It's insightful, it's cutting, it's a must read every week. So yeah, I'm really happy that we're finally touching base. Thank you, Grace, and thank you guys for making that happen. Yeah, so I was just going through that. Grace asked me like what Cynthia and I just did, so I was just going through our little cross Canadian tour, our speaking engagements, and we did, like, depending on the audience, we in the case of when I was speaking at the People's Party of Canada rally, I was asked to go through the an explanation in a short form for a big audience on how they can understand the current drive for kicking over the chessboard that might result in a nuclear war if people don't keep their heads on, as part of the economic disintegration of the transatlantic banking system as two sides of the same thing, because they're often treated separately, mistakenly. And so I did that as best as I could, with a bit of a focus on how World War I, World War II were very much tied to the manipulations of the banking system. So that was my assignment with that. And then when we hosted an event afterwards, we invited some people who wanted to know. There were a lot of questions about secret societies. So we were like, well, since it's on everybody's mind, let's do an event on that, which that's what we did for about 4 hours the next day, is just shedding light on how did events that transpired 1,000 years ago with the Crusades and the different Gnostic orders of Templars and Hospitallers that became the Knights of Malta and these various, Teutonic orders. How did that, those mystery cults, how did they interface with very similar parallel mystery cults in the Muslim world around certain Hashashin, Sufi assassins that were working with the Templars to keep the Forever Wars going? And how could that inform us, especially considering the connection to the Solomon Temple mysticism, these Kabbalistic, mystics that want to revive Solomon's Temple, which took over, Western Freemasonry in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. How does that impact the creation of Zionism as a political ideology or as a time bomb, which was set up over a century ago to blow up? So, and how do you defuse the time bomb? So what type of thinking is needed when you got an ideological time bomb being set off, knowing that you also have, heirs to those Templar traditions in the West, willing to kill Jews and Christians alike, even though they act like they're Christian, they're not, they're Gnostics. And then similarly, you have pagan Gnostic Satanists masquerading as Muslims, operating through different secret societies like the Order of Luxor and others, the Keepers of the Kaaba. There's certain networks there that are all working together with the Muslim Brotherhood to also kill off a bunch of their own fellow Arab people in some weird eschatological, journey or adventure, which could destroy everybody. So how do you, if I'm a Putin, or I'm a Xi Jinping, or somebody who actually has to make decisions, I'm trying to get my mind into, like, how do I have to think in order to diffuse that type of shit show Gordian knot of messes, So that was what we tried to do, and now we're back in Montreal.
Well, thank you, Matthew.
Yeah.
And reading and looking at everything that you and Cynthia have been doing, for me, in my simple understanding, it's like it gives me really clarity of what's going on, because it's too confusing when, like, why would Israel keep doing what it's doing and escalating it, like as if you want to destroy yourself by destroying all others. Okay. And then, of course, most of us know already that the collective West have certain, like, targets that they want to really put in everyone's mind, that this, like, Russia is an enemy, Iran is an enemy, China is an enemy, like, strategically in certain places. But I always say to my friends who when I kept to keep saying, I said, well, just think, who has the most military base in the world? I said, for me, that's like very basic. So I guess, can you continue by, what's your thought on what really awaits us, or who's been lighting really the West Asia conflicts and the chaos, and what can we do as people? And because I know that you also have done that conversation in the American University in Moscow. And I think that is such a good platform, and maybe most of us can do more of that. And how can we contribute that the escalation will be, stopped?
It's not an easy answer, and it's fuel for a bigger conversation, I guess, which is the intended point of your question. But I'll deflect to Drago. What do you think, Drago?
Well, I mean, it's a really good question, as you said, and there's no easy answer. I think the problem we have is that there's an extremist government in Israel, which has essentially entrapped the country itself, and it's threatening the existence of the Jewish state. And because, I mean, if you just look at the map of Israel, we can see that it's a very small country. and it has taken a very big bite of the entire Middle East and fighting multiple enemies at the same time. I mean, people who probably would have been enemies if Israel had actually had a more let's say normal and balanced political position. The issue is if we look at a country like Iran, it doesn't even need a nuclear weapon to destroy Israel. If we look at the size of Israel, and if we look at the fact that most of Israelis actually live in the coastal areas, Iranian targets are actually much smaller than what we see on the map. And there's not, as I said, it's a small country. There's not a lot on the map. So now, if some reports about Iran getting nuclear weapons are true, that actually makes Iran's job of destroying Israel much easier. So Israel then has to sort of like continue existing in this sort of mad world. And when I say mad, I mean mutual assured destruction that existed during the first Cold War. And now they have like between 90 and 400 nukes. They can try to destroy Iran, but they will also be destroyed themselves. So I mean, what's the point of that? There's not much point if everything is going to be destroyed. The problem is that it's very difficult to prevent the escalation of war, because in the next month or so, actually less than a month, we see that the deep state needs some kind of a war that they will leave to Trump, if nothing else, or at least make the staging ground, create a staging ground for the Trump administration to continue some sort of a war in the Middle East, because they realize they can't win against Russia. Russia is just too powerful. China too. They can try to maintain some sort of like a Cold War, proxy war conflict with those countries. But Iran is a more probable target because it's a lot less powerful. It is still very, very powerful, but it's a lot less powerful than these two previous countries I mentioned. So they need some kind of a war. It's obvious they need to maintain the war machine. And if Trump takes power without a war happening already, it's going to be very, very difficult to get him to war, to start another war, because Trump is not like his way of thinking is just not like that. He's a business like-minded person, and war is not good for business in his mind. So I really hope, my prognosis is incorrect. I really hope nothing happens, but I think we're going to see a lot of stuff in the next month or so.
Yeah, I concur. I concur entirely, and I think your assessment of Trump, because I'm obviously Trump is one of these characters who's very divisive in many ways, and people who are in our community who tend to think a bit more critically about mainstream narratives have tended to, in the last several years especially, become very black-pilled and jaded about the idea that everybody is controlled opposition. There is no ultimately. I mean, I'm not going to list names. I think everybody watching can probably find their own reference points of which names I'm talking about, but it's very, very hegemonic amongst the alternative media consumer community to think that everything is controlled. All we can do from that standpoint, if you believe that there's 100% full control, I'm not saying that, and I don't think anybody here would disagree with this, there are Trojan horses and bad actors within all branches of the political spectrum in the United States. The MAGA movement is no exception. We see them all over Trump's. We saw it in his first term, different Trojan horses. We saw John Bolton, Pompeo, Steve Bannon, who at least Steve Bannon, Trump was smart enough to fire him and keep him at arm's length for that period. But you've got a whole bunch of influential, very bad actors who want to influence what Trump has revived inside of the American zeitgeist and use it to their advantage. And I think amongst that grouping, I would include Peter Thiel, the transhumanists of Silicon Valley that have marketed themselves as a libertarian response to the Great Reset. But ultimately, if you look at Elon Musk, Thiel, who are all part of this Silicon Valley transhumanist mafia, they're all second, third generation children of figures who were very high up in the military industrial complex, as was Bezos, whose grandfather was a director at DARPA. Bill Gates, another synthetic cutout, right? Whose parents were highly enmeshed within the Rockefeller machinery. So you've got a gang counter gang operation. All of them are united in a common view of transhumanism, with different expressions of what this world post nation state empire means, where the libertarian Bitcoin Freedom City crowd is calling for essentially merging human beings with machines to stay relevant, creating little highly controlled 15-minute cities, except the libertarian varieties are pushed by Palantir and Thiel involve Bitcoin freedom and somehow private corporations running the management of cities instead of technocrats or globalists. But it's the same thing. If the corporations like Palantir military industrial contractor is if it's operational on behalf of the Bilderberger groups, which have been behind the whole operation for the last 70 years, then it's a fake opposition, clearly. And privatizing everything is not a solution to making everything public so that only a few own things that they rent to everyone else. It's a convergence thing. That being said, I do see Trump and a few people around Trump as authentic human beings who are primarily businessmen. I agree with you entirely. And their pragmatic stance, it's not like they're necessarily paragons of virtue. I don't see him as a messiah figure, as some pro-Trump white-pilled people who refuse to see any shades of gray. I don't see him like that, as do you. But I do see him as a pragmatist, and thus and a human being who does seem to have some connection to qualities that humans have that technocrats don't have. It's matters of basic conscience seems to have not been killed in Trump. A certain idea of patriotism that's important.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
blowing up the world, bad for business.
Yeah.
So absolutely, it's a big factor.
I think, like, he doesn't need to be a good person, but that makes him a saint in comparison to these other crazies that actually want to blow up the world and then check to see, if these bunkers are going to work in the next 5 years, when they run out of food and when there's a radioactive wasteland above. They probably want to try that, and he doesn't. And that really makes him, like as you said, like, not a paragon of virtue, but in comparison to them, he is a saint. So
yeah.
And
May I say something?
Yeah,
I see it differently. First of all, I don't see a World War III directly. Let's start with the war between Iran and Israel. Iran has attacked Israel, that's right, but no one is really killed. And the point is Iran got support from Russia. Sorry. And the situation is, if they got the support from Russia, they have now supersonic missiles. Supersonic missiles
Sure.
need a very precise satellite navigation system. So Iran can attack Israel very precisely where they want to. They can destroy the infrastructure immediately. Israel can destroy the infrastructure of Iran as well. So both countries would suffer. Secondly, if Israel would attack Iran, in that moment, Iran would block the Strait of Hormuz. And 20% of all the oil from the Arabic states go to Europe. In that moment, the price of oil and gas would increase immensely. And the weapon industry in Europe it's a very intensive, it's a production which needs a lot of energy. So the point is, the weapon industry couldn't produce any weapons anymore like it has done before. But Israel is depending on the weapons of Europe, and also depending on the weapons of USA. Without the weapons of Europe and without the weapons of USA, the war in Gaza would have been over already. So the situation is, if Israel attacks Iran, They don't risk their own country, but they risk also that the weapon supply will not work anymore. And in a war, you have to think in a long-term basis, never in a short-term basis. So without the weapons, it looks very difficult for Israel to hold the situation in which it is right now.
Drago, you want to? Oh, sorry, yeah.
And the point is, well, there are three possibilities. The first of all, okay, World War III will happen. The second one, in my opinion, Israel has the intention to kick out all the people, the Palestinians, from Gaza and from West Bank. And the third solution is that the Israelis have to leave. And it's all about money, in my opinion, because in the oil and gas field in front of Gaza has a value of $524 billion US. This is comparable with Dubai. Dubai has an oil reserve of 320 billion, a little bit less than Gaza. And Dubai became one of the most powerful cities in the world by diversification. This means they didn't only work with oil, but they established infrastructure, technology, services, international trade, and financial services. And this became a very very good city. Gaza has the same potential, like Donald Trump said, that Gaza could be the Monaco of the Middle East. And this is, and if we think like that, then we have to think further. For example, let's say, first of all, the oil and gas reserve cannot be used by Gaza at the moment because Israel is controlling the sea, according to international sea law, in order to control Gaza from getting weapons. But they have not the right to exploit the oil and gas field. So only if the Palestinians would surrender it, they would have the right to exploit the oil and gas fields. And in that moment, if the Israelis would exploit the oil and gas fields, then the situation could flourish. But very important, it could become a very economical, powerful area, theoretically. This means that people from all over the world would come and would invest, and you would establish a city like Dubai. And you would also invite immigrants, more or less, from the Western world to live there. So you would have tourism, you would have agriculture, you have everything on a very wealthy, high standard. The problem is, in that area, maybe you'd have then 6 million people living there, but you have 1.7 million people who are Palestinians. And if the Palestinians see how this land will flourish, how this land will grow economically to one of the richest areas of the world, it would make them very angry. But let's say 1.7 million says, okay, I'm very happy to live like how I can live right now. I can live in peace. I can travel, whatever. Theoretically, this is only analysis. It's only a strategy analysis what I do right now. So this means Israel has established this wealth area on the bones of the Palestinians, and this would make the people angry because Israel would never accept, in my opinion, that the Palestinians would come also in the upper class, only in the lower class or middle class maximum. And if only 3% of the Palestinians would say enough is enough, We will organize us, we will strategize, we are warriors, and we get a weapon supply. In that moment, you have 51,000 people. And these 51,000 people can damage the whole project. With 51,000 soldiers, no money will come in this area, no diversification is possible, and the point is that you cannot establish a second Monaco. And for this reason, in my opinion, as I don't think that the Israelis are irrational, like Vanessa Billy said it last time. They are very rational, but they like to be seen as irrational. And for this reason, they use the hate among the population in order to get this land for themselves completely, so that they can establish a complete new Monaco in this area. This is my personal opinion.
Question.
There are no evidence.
Question for you.
Yes.
Why do you think they're trying to start simultaneously wars on Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and the Gaza all at the same time, and also Yemen? Like, why are they lashing out in all directions at the same time and not just focusing on the Gaza?
In my opinion, they do it this is my personal opinion. In Gaza, everything is destroyed already. No house is standing anymore. And we have winter time right now. And there are 1.1 million people who are close to starvation. And starvation is a silent death. In the moment when you start wars with other countries, you see explosions. And on all the media, you can see the explosions, and Gaza comes on the second or third or fourth place. They just need to wait for 3 to 4 months in order to get what they want. Because Lebanon has only 40 billion, has only an oil reserve, an oil field, I think, oil or gas field of $40 billion. Yeah, it's not a lot what Lebanon has concerning oil and gas field in comparison to Gaza.
Are you answering my question? I don't understand if my question was answered.
I answered your question in that case, that these are fires, that they established the wars with other countries, so that in the medias the other countries will be mentioned and not Gaza anymore.
But Gaza is still being mentioned. That's
it's still being mentioned, but the point
clearly
is
not working. Why are they still accelerating?
In my opinion, they want to put the attention away from Gaza. This is my opinion. And what they underestimated was Iran. They didn't think that Iran would have the possibility to hit them.
Okay.
This was new. This was a completely new situation.
Their intelligence is just awful. Okay, Drago, do you have a thought on that whole line of?
Well, I mean, he does make several very good points. I think Hartmut, you do raise several very good points. The problem is when it comes to Israel, they do have what's called the Samson option, which we might call rational or irrational, whatever. But the very fact that they have missiles that can reach Moscow and Washington D.C. and everything else in between is pretty telling, because the primary enemy of a country like Israel is Iran, and they have Jericho 3 ICBMs, which are not necessary to reach Iran. So the Samson option is definitely something. It's not a conspiracy theory; it actually exists. So we have to take that into account. For Israel, it doesn't matter if the global oil supply is going to be destroyed if they don't exist anymore, and all they would care about would be to destroy anyone else. To drag them with them. So this is a problem with the extremists in the government in Israel, the people who are ready to burn down the world if they're not in it anymore, or if what they want is not given to them. By the global powers. particularly the West, the political West, I mean. So in that regard, I think Israel doesn't care about what's going to happen after them. On the other hand, we have the U.S., which obviously has issues with that because they know if the oil supplies from the Hormuz Strait is disrupted in any way, then they would have to get oils from Russia, from Venezuela, and all these other countries that are not under their control, obviously. So this is why they would like to keep countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar. They would like to keep them neutral, officially neutral. But the thing is, Iran also has its own, let's call it a mini Samson option, and this is to destroy all oil wells in the area if they see they're going to be destroyed, or if they see they would lose a war. So this is simply we could say, as I said, we could call it irrational, but actually it is a very rational way of thinking for any government, because if they know that they're going to be destroyed, they want to make sure that the damage they do is maximum. So if we're talking about sustaining the war in Gaza, I think you're 100% right, but the potential for escalation exists, and all the countries that Matt mentioned are essentially proxies of Israel, of Iran, or allies of Iran, or if you want, the axis of resistance, as it's called. And I think this is the reason why they're attacking these areas, because they want to provoke Iran 100% to make sure there's a war. And Israel and the deep state are completely in concert with each other when it comes to this. They want to cause more war in the area. They want to eliminate Iran as a threat permanently. And if they can't do it with a coup or a color revolution, they would probably try to do it militarily. And the only way to do it is with nuclear weapons, because Iran is just too big to be destroyed by conventional means. I mean, the much smaller Iraq was not destroyed by conventional means. It was damaged to beyond repair for the last 30 years, but it was never really conquered. And we see that now because Iranian militias are essentially dominating in Iraq. So Iran would be a much bigger target. And in 2003, you had like 250,000 Americans ready to fight the Iraq war. Now those people don't exist anymore. Like, we don't have the manpower needed to destroy Iran. And what that leaves us with are nuclear weapons. And the U.S. has deployed these nuclear submarines armed with the so-called, I think I mentioned this a few times already, W-76-2 warheads, which are 2 to 7 kilotons. And the logic behind this is, if you use a nuclear weapon with a very low yield, then it's the so-called conventional use of a nuclear weapon, and then it's justified. That's the logic of the crazies at the Pentagon. And I think I mentioned there are actually papers among military think tanks that are using this and are proposing the use of these weapons as a logical and a good step. So again, those are just insane people, and they've demonstrated the readiness to use these weapons. I mean, a 2 to 7 kiloton warhead is useless against a country like Russia or China, but it can be very, very useful against a country like Iran, at least before the country gets nuclear armed, which I presume, if as I said, if the rumors are true, Iran is moving in that direction, because that's the only way to essentially deter someone from using nuclear weapons against you. And that's, for you to have your own.
But if Israel would use nuclear weapons or in order to destroy Iran, in that moment, China and Russia would intervene immediately.
Well, the problem is, how would they intervene? There's not really a way to stop an ICBM fired anywhere, even one. I mean, the U.S. has probably the invested the most money in these so-called ABM systems that are strategic ABM systems, specifically the GDM, or Global Anti-Defense Missile Shield, with the GDI, or with these interceptors that are essentially used to intercept ICBMs. And every single one of these interceptors costs around 3 to 4 times more than the ICBM that it needs to shoot down. And in order to get to the 97% interception chance, you need 4 of those. So, and they have 68, if I'm not mistaken. They have 68 of these interceptors. So if you really calculate, you could in the best case scenario, you could shoot down 10 missiles, and there are hundreds, and the Russians have around 350. The Chinese have around 200, 150 to 200. Like countries that are nuclear armed have far more than the U.S. could shoot down. So and the thing is, the Russians and the Chinese haven't even invested in capabilities like these because they know it's useless, it's pointless, and it's a waste of money. In the US, that makes sense because there's a military industrial complex. It wants to make more and more money, so it's ready to invest into useless weapons like they often do. But the Russians and the Chinese are far more pragmatic. So the problem is, once the nuclear war starts, there's nothing that can stop it. Like, nobody knows to which point of escalation a country is ready to go, because whenever they were doing these war games, they were thinking, okay, we could control the escalation to a certain degree, but the point is, every time they would establish that they can't really control the point of escalation. You can always go full-blown nuclear war. Even a tactical nuclear war could escalate into a strategic one in matter of hours. So this is the real danger. I don't think the Chinese and the Russians have the means to prevent Israel from attacking Iran with nuclear weapons, just like any other country doesn't have the means to prevent anyone else from attacking some other country.
No, but
I mean, the technology is not there.
It's not. They cannot prevent from attacking. But the point is, Israel would bring itself in huge danger in that moment.
That's correct.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
they would.
They're expecting it.
I gotta. Can I chime in with some considerations? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been over the last couple of years, especially, going into revisiting all of what I thought I knew very well about history and geopolitics from the vantage point of looking at occultism and occult secret societies. So that's been like a new factor I've added to my considerations. And I know it's a crazy domain, and there's a lot of misinformation and ambiguity. So it's people get messy with it, and thus academics and responsible thinkers tend to stay away from that world because it's nuts. It's full of craziness. But because the oligarchy, which we live under an oligarchy of inbred, continuous bloodlines going back some time, they tend to keep things kind of, closed. Both culturally amongst themselves, but also in terms of like who they intermarry with, what types of institutions they bring online. It's very close. That thing that's latched onto the West for a very long time. They have certain myths that they believe in. There's certain things that animate them. So that because it's shaping my world, I have to look at it as best as I can. One thing that involved me looking at is the factor of murder-suicide cults. Whether it's the local, like, small things like Charles Manson, and the Manson family, or, as sort of like one CIA Scientology managed process church cult, which, again, murder, suicide, Gnostic cult. They had a whole cosmology around Manson being the avatar of like Odin and Jesus and Lucifer all in one man. They want to merge like sacredness and profanity together. And thus you've got this whole, series of controlled exercises that deconstructs people's identities. Drugs helps, hypersensualization mixed with withholding, mixed with torture, trauma-based mind control. There's things like that all kind of are used in various currents to get a very similar effect, a deconstruction of the identity, a detachment of the self, from the I from the self. That happens, a schisming of personalities into very, very schizophrenic modalities that allow for somebody to be functional in the daytime and then highly okay with doing highly bad things at night, right? I'm going to use very diplomatic language. There's something that's been worked on as a science of doing that unnaturally, in defiance of natural law and everything reasonable and good in the universe. There's this other thing that humans have allowed to grow. That's been shaping a lot of things. So murder suicide cults, small or easy to think about for some people, like, you know, Jim Jonestown, things like that are easy to think about. But when you increase the influence of these things, it's harder to think about how these could have like political influence. And this whole Samson doctrine is a real doctrine. Like, what type of society, right, would ever generate such a strategic doctrine as the Samson doctrine, which involves if you feel like an inch of your blood and soil land that you have tied your spiritual identities to is at risk of falling away from you, which is obviously, you know, it can't do that, because this is the existence in the mind of these types of people of Israel as a state is the actualization of a covenant made thousands of years ago by God to Moses, who passed down, you know, a secret doctrine to his elite followers, and then a public doctrine in the form of the Torah. These Kabbalists believe these two different teachings. They believe in a numerological sort of flavor to the universe, but they also believe that that greater Israel has to happen, which means purging the here. I got it actually an image. Let me do two things here, because it's not about money. I've come to realize it's not about money. That is a consideration for most people in the world when they make their considerations politically, but they're not the ones who make things happen. There's a higher function above those useful tools who do wars for money or oil, which is willing to destroy all the money in the world for the sake of something else. And that's the thing that I think is at play right now, is a consideration, Hartmut, that doesn't really even want oil to be something used for humanity in the new age that they want to bring about after a phoenix-like purge, a burning, a purgative cleanse of all of the past traditions of the earth to create a new type of human. I think that that's actually something that certain ideological groupings with power are into that crazy shit. And I'm just going to play a video here. Grace, could you play this little 1-minute video? This is Benjamin Netanyahu and a key Chabad Lubavitch rabbi in 1990, and you just listen to this thing.
Matt, I
Yep.
put it up, but you can control it on your end.
I control it? Oh,
Yes.
good. Okay,
So-
let me go do that. I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah, just
1
press
second.
No,
I see.
go to your screen.
I understand. I'll do that now. Here we are.
Ma wann Zeit doch nicht gesehen.
There's no sound, eh? That's okay.
We hear the sound.
Oh, good. That's the Messiah. The Messiah still hasn't come.
הכנראה שאם מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר כמה שעות בדין ועדיין לבוא, אבל יש עוד כמה שעות, אבל יש להשתדל גם היום, בבשורות טובות. זה שמחה וטוב לבוא. הכדי שחסידים מקפידים שכל ימנים ומצאת שמחה. בשורות טובות, הצלחה רבה.
Okay, that's one thing I want to show, just to be aware that Netanyahu is like a child being chastised by this Kabbalistic rabbi who's really of the view that there's something Netanyahu must do to hasten the arrival of the Messiah. So that's one thing. There's a second thing I want to show here, also for our considerations. This is, you guys can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. This fellow here is a good guy. He was the former justice minister to Israel, who said on November 6, 2000, his name is Yossi Beilin. He said Zionism was founded in order to save the Jews from persecution and anti-Semitism, and not in order to offer them a Jewish Sparta or, God forbid, a new Masada. Now, what is Masada? Does anybody know what the Masada cult was?
I know about the Battle of Masada, but I'm not sure about the Masada cult.
Okay. It's a cult of extreme Jews who did fight the Romans at the Battle of Masada. Except when they sensed that they might be defeated or would be defeated in that battle, instead of giving up, because the whole idea was, you know, the Solomon's temple had just been wrecked or was in the middle of being dismantled by the Romans. So they were obsessed with this idea that they had to rebuild, and you know, Solomon's temple as the basis of global, of what their idea of what Judaism was. They committed suicide, mass suicide, all of them. Their cult continued after this 900 or 1,000 members of this Spartan-like Masada cult committed suicide. They just killed each other and also their families. They continued on. So this movement continued, and it manifested at the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 630. Bar Kokhba was a guy who said, "I'm the Messiah." And you've got a lot of these people every generation in the Jewish world that say, "I'm the Messiah, I'm the guy." And usually when you look at who's handling them, they're kind of like Charles. You could usually find like Charles Manson or Jim Jones. You scratch behind the surface, you find intelligence agencies looming over, utilizing these creatures for geopolitical purposes. Bar Kokhba led the creation of a Jewish homeland in 360 or so, and he was used by Julian the Apostate, the guy who was the last real, you know, the emperor that overtly tried to revive all the mystery cults again, Mithra, Isis, Cybele. And he used the Jews against the Christians a lot. Now, the thing about the Bar Kokhba thing is once they established it, and Julian the Apostate promised the reconstruction of the Third Solomon Temple, that was a big thing. The Bar Kokhba rebellion, where they held the fort for like 2 years. Finally, they saw that Rome wasn't cooperating. It wasn't working out, and they fought harder against the Romans under the Jewish Messiah to rebuild the temple when the promises were not following through. That it gave the excuse to wipe out something like 1/4 of all Jews in the world by the Romans. So there were certain people that wanted to use Bar Kokhba as an excuse to clamp down and just do mass anti-Jewish purges everywhere. And the only types of Jews that they would permit in the Roman Empire were the court Jews, right? The either earlier it was Pharaoh's Jews. You know, the Roman Empire had those Jews that would be permitted to have privileges as long as they collected the taxes, as long as they did the monetary dirty work, and thus also received the risk when the angry hordes of pitchforks and torches would come to like get revenge on those economic oppressors. The people who would be thrown under the bus would be the tax collectors, the money lenders, that would always be servants of a higher power that wanted somebody disposable, right? But they would be the receivers of hate. Later on, it would be the Rothschilds, the Sassoons. So I'm saying this because Yossi Beilin is very aware that you had this thing, and I'm going to show another image here. Keeping in mind what, window here. That had come in over the dead body of Yitzhak Rabin, which involved clean break, right? So we all I think have heard of the Project for a New American. It's Century. That's Richard Pearl. Clean break was a doctrine that the peanut crowd of Paul Wolfowitz and others wrote for Benjamin Netanyahu after Yitzhak Rabin was killed, who had been fighting for the two-state solution. Now that basically called for one, ending Yasser Arafat's and the Palestinian Authority's political influence, or the PLO especially, by blaming them for acts of Palestinian terrorism, inducing the United States to overthrow. Oh yeah, you can share my screen if it's not there. Oh, it's there. Inducing the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. So it was a Christian Zionist collusion with these Benjamin Netanyahu Masada cultists, launching war against Syria after Saddam's regime is disposed, followed by a buildup against Iran specifically. And the overall idea of the cleansing of the land of those Arabs living there involves this idea of Greater Israel. That's the borders of it. A lot of the people, including Jabotinsky's assistant, who was Benjamin Netanyahu's father, were big promoters of Greater Israel. And the last image I just want to show here, and this is again, they worked very closely with certain figures within the Muslim Brotherhood, even within the Nazis. The Nazis in the 1940s were working with various fascists within both the Israeli corridor as well as, or these particular Zionists around Jabotinsky, who saw himself as an Israeli fascist, modeling his techniques on the brown shirts of Mussolini, and Haj Amin, who is the head mufti of Jerusalem, selected by the British, who worked with the Muslim Brotherhood, a British Freemasonic grouping that was seeded into Israel, that managed the deep state and worked together with these on both sides of the corridor. Now, the last guy I'm going to show is the British selection for the lead rabbi of Jerusalem for over 20 years. His name was Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, who worked with Jabotinsky. And this is a really important quote. Because Rabbi Cook's influence is incredibly big. Now, he was hated by most Jews when he was alive, as was Haj Amin, who was despised by most Arabs while he was alive, and only after they died were both of these British selected representatives of Judaism and Christianity, or Judaism and Islam, did they become idolized or turn into heroic figures. But at the time that they were alive, they were both seen popularly as agents, provocateurs. Now, Abraham Cook said that the truth concerning the land is revealed in Kabbalah. Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, militates for life in the land of Israel. Rationalistic approaches to Judaism place no special value on the land of Israel. In wars, national characters crystallize. Israel, as the universal reflection of mankind, benefits thereby. The heels of Messiah follow upon world conflagration. At the hour of the downfall of Western civilization, Israel is called upon to fulfill its divine mission by providing the spiritual basis for a new world order. And I'm just saying all of this because it's really, really, really important that people realize, like, this guy's philosophy became the basis of every single yeshiva that produced the illegal settlers movement from the 50s, 60s, 70s to the present. It's disproportionately influential amongst all of these crazy ass settler movements, as well as those groupings that took over Israel after the 7-Day War or 6-Day War. Brain glitch. What is it? 6-Day, 7-Day? Help me out.
I think it's a 6-day war. If
6-Day War. I don't know why I got 7-Day War. That was weird. But you had a coup d'etat where a lot of these Rabbi Cook followers infused themselves into the government. They had to destroy an American ship as well, but it was an inside job. They did a coup. They purged those more reasonable labor Zionists who had sort of organized and had influence in the 50s and 60s under Ben-Gurion, who was not a good guy, but he wasn't, again, he's like a Trump figure. He wasn't into blowing up the world for some ideological reasons. Now, these other guys who overthrew his grouping in 60, 67, 68, 69, they were. And they're the ones who brought in the Samson doctrine, or the other doctrine of like killing your own people. If you sense that one of your fellow Israelis might be taken hostage, to kill them, which is a big thing that happened in October 7th last year. Mass killing of their own people. So there's this factor. And that's why I'm saying I don't think nuclear war is going to happen, but I don't think things are being done for money purposes as a motive. And I think there's this other thing which makes the danger of nuclear war a very real possibility, and one that we have to, that I think if I try to put myself into the shoes of a Russian geopolitical state, like a statesman or a Chinese or Iranian or anybody, like somebody who's who has political influence and has to be sensitive to this thing, I think that they are bringing this into their considerations and trying to think, how do they deal with a nuclear armed Israel that's willing to blow up all of their allies and themselves for some eschatological belief that the world must go through a conflagration at the end times for the Messiah to come, which also some Christians and some crazy ass Gnostic Muslims believe too, through the Mahdi being brought in through this end times global bloodbath, that they believe they have to somehow be instruments to help out. And a bunch of, Christian followers of the 700 Club, who watch like Benny Hinn and John Hagee and these ministries of evangelical Pentecostalists, who believe in the rapture. And, they also kind of want at the end of the day, end times to happen now, so the Messiah can come back a second time. But that's in play, and it's satanic. It's crazy, but it's in play.
It has to be taken into account. It has to be taken into account, definitely.
What I want to mention
Sorry,
is
Hartmut,
that many Jews are buying land in South America at the moment, huge land in South America, in order to establish autonomous regions. And there are already 5 regions in Ukraine which are autonomous regions of Israel, of Jews. So regions where the Jews have the control. And there is also the probability that many Jews will leave Israel. And
I think they're leaving now, Hartmut. I think they're leaving now. And also, I want to interrupt you with you saying, that they buying lands. That connects also to what Matthew and Drago were saying, and what it's shown about that Zionist, rabbi. That that's part of the part of the nefarious plan. Okay, so you spread there, and that's in different areas. That's where they will create the burning, as what's the term, conflagration. So that's where they will create those things.
The question is, for example, do you think that the guidestones who are destroyed are still, let's say, that the targets of the guidestone are still in activity, that they really want to reduce the populations still, or do you think they don't want to do it anymore?
Oh yeah,
they want to. Yeah,
sure.
And in that moment, and this is my way of thinking, for example, I think in morphogenetic fields, the Satanists like rituals. For example, all the fires in, or for example, if animals are killed by viruses, for example, the virus for cows before the war in Falkland in the 80s, or for example, the wildfires in Australia before March 2020, and then the corona came. So they like to work in rituals in order to drill a hole in the morphogenetic field, in my opinion. And the wars, what we are facing right now on this planet, for example, like in Gaza, like also in Ukraine, is brings us to another level in cruelty, because everything is destroyed, nearly everything. And in my opinion, what they are going to do is they will increase the war on this planet. Anyhow, I don't think that they will use atomic bombs, because if you use atomic bombs, everything is destroyed. What they can do, and this is my opinion, they will do it like in Maui. Yeah, for example, Operation Bluebeam. I believe in Operation Bluebeam because the University of Edinburgh or Glasgow in Scotland.
Bluebeam is the holograms.
Yes, it's a hologram, and
yeah.
The universities are already so developed that they can create a basketball by hologram, so that you feel you can touch it.
No, you mean it looks as though it looks so real that you believe you could touch it, but you can't.
It looks so. Yes, sorry.
Oh,
it looks so that it looks so real that you can believe you can touch it.
Sure.
And for example, if you use this kind of holograms together with airplanes and use direct energy weapons like in Maui, then I think this is the way they can destroy the planet. They destroy the land, the people. I think they will use direct energy weapons, because these direct energy weapons can destroy a lot without damaging the nature.
I wouldn't discount all of these, directed energy beam weapons and other things. I mean, we've got on all sides of the Cold War secret science programs developed over 80 years after World War II, with a variety of things we can only speculate about. We can
of course we can speculate this.
Right. Yeah. I don't like for the directed energy beam weapons. I am convinced that they use some form of these things in Maui. I agree with you. How practically useful this type of thing would be in actual hard kinetic warfare, I don't know. I know in a civilian population center, that's totally at a passive state and unexpecting. These things can burn through a lot. But that being said, again, when you're dealing with nation to nation hard war, I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't think, what I could say though is that we do seem to agree that the overarching idea is not for money or monetary considerations, but depopulation is a primary driving consideration.
Yes.
Everything is on the table. As far as I see it, we're in a place where it's going to be, I mean, there's a full spectrum cyber warfare, bacteriological warfare, different pathogens developed in the U.S. armada of bio laboratories built up all around the world that have been doing all sorts of work on weaponized pathogens. And I'm not talking about COVID, because I don't even think that that's a thing. But I do think that the weaponization of pathogens that are ethnically targeted was a direct, openly stated intention by the Project for New American Century when they wrote their Rebuilding America's Defenses doctrine in 2000. So that's something that they've been doing. And I think the Chinese, the Russians have been sort of on DEFCON 2, waiting for that as one aspect of an onslaught. Targeted pathogens focused on Slavic or Han genotypes. That's something that Lavrov has even spoken openly about as a concern. But there's everything's on the table right now. We're at the end of a system. So, I mean, I'm not going to say it's going to be one thing or another. It's probably going to be some combination.
It's a combination.
Yeah, and I don't think nuclear weapons should be discarded either.
In the moment we have this atomic war, let's say, in the moment Iran will be attacked with atomic bombs, I think the whole economy will collapse.
Sure.
And then
well, I mean, that might be one of their goals. I think
that's their goal. That's a goal. That's part of the equation, or part of the desires. I think is the blowout of the economy anyway.
Yeah. I mean, since both of you mentioned bacteriological warfare, in August 2021, there was this meeting between the Russian and the American General Staff, and Mark Milley and Valery Gerasimov actually spoke about these things in 2019, 2020, and 2021. There were these mysterious diseases that were affecting humans and animals and plants in Russia, in southern Russia and southwestern Russia. And the Russians realized that these things were engineered. And then they realized that they came from labs in Ukraine and Georgia. And then Gerasimov actually told, in no uncertain terms, he told Milley that if these things continue in Russia, that Russia will consider the US and Russia to be in a state of war, and they will use nuclear weapons. This is the problem, because pathogens and biowarfare are extremely dangerous because we have no idea how they're going to develop. Once you develop a biological weapon, there's no way to predict how the weapon is going to behave. If we look at the haplogroups in Europe, the Poles and the Russians and the Ukrainians and Belarusians are exactly the same, genetically speaking. So if you create an ethnic-based weapon against the Russians, you're also going to kill Ukrainians and Poles and Slovaks and a bunch of other Slavs. And then you have the Western Europeans who are genetically very similar to Slavic people. If I'm not mistaken, it's R1A and R1B haplogroups. So we have no idea how the virus that's going to destroy the R1A, how it's going to mutate and might actually affect R1B or any other haplogroup that's connected to these groups that are neighboring, essentially. So, and of course, the rest of us, the human beings who belong to different haplogroups, but we are still human beings and we share like nearly 100% of genome. So if there is any sort of difference between races, it's so minuscule that the pathogen is really going to have no trouble of mutating to destroy most of us or all of us. Because if it can mutate from an animal to a human, then it can mutate obviously between humans. And this is why I agree with Matt when he says that nuclear war is possible, because if you are a leader of a country that's now being targeted by bioweapons and you have no other tool except nuclear weapons to retaliate, well, you might as well use those nuclear weapons, right? That's the logic. And this is why it's so dangerous.
What I don't understand in that case is, for example, let's say by the injection, that many people got spike protein production, which goes to the brain barrier in the brain. And And the President Putin invites everyone to come who wants to come to Russia. So in that point, he would also has to put in consideration that he brings the bioweapon to Russia.
Well, I mean, it's impossible to isolate a country like Russia or any other big country. I mean, even a small country, you couldn't really isolate. So I don't think that, I mean, in that regard, it's the least of his problems if those people come, because it's simply impossible to control the border of any country 100% to prevent even a single person with any sort of a pathogen from coming in and spreading it wherever. So, especially
But
now
you
in this
understand what I
global
want to
world.
say. Why does he invite all the people to come who wants to come?
He's not inviting he knows that those who are going to come are people who are already greatly resistant to the doctrines of the Great Reset and the
Right.
Anglo-American messaging. He knows that those who believe that, who drank the Kool-Aid, are not going to want to come to Russia.
That's right.
So he's already narrowed down his target base audience, I think.
He's no dummy. I want to hear from Roy, because Roy is just near Drago.
Just enjoying the conversation. Well, if you talk about those that got the poison dart or whatever, and if they are going to Russia, I mean, some people think that they can be controlled with 5G. That hasn't been rolled out in Russia, which is surprising. And I when I actually done a search on that, because you can see where all the towers are, it's kind of an empty field compared to the rest of the world. So that could be a reason that they can't do the same control. Regarding what Hartmut was saying about Gaza and stuff like that, and they can be the new Dubai or whatever. Ireland has massive oil and gas fields, and our politicians, I think it was Charles Haughey at the time, they signed off everything. We don't get a penny from that. So at the end of the day, you need the people with the technology to come in, and all you need is one corrupt politician or whoever's in control grease their palms, and you don't own anything. So that's going on all around the world. If we're looking at the wars, look at the UK. They're still own a quarter of our country up the north. They're in the Falklands, they're in Gibraltar, and they're kind of telling people what to do. So, it's one thing that, Matt, you might know this one for. We're looking at all the craziness that's going on. And if we look at the Antarctic Treaty, I know I believe it's 57 countries that have kind of how they've never agreed on anything. Is there any from the Middle East on that? I'm just wondering, how that's all. Everyone's trying to find out what's going on there, and they've all come to an agreement that that's kind of off grounds. So how can that happen, and yet everyone's at each other's feet on the rest of the world?
You just used into your considerations the Antarctic Treaty after saying a lot of other things. That's a deep dive I still have to do. I've only done summary analysis on the Antarctic question, which certainly is very interesting and provocative to me. I don't have like a direct solution, but it does seem like there are geological facts that are not permitted to be spoken aloud, pertaining to the evidence of what is a non-standard model geological science that the Antarctic likely has under a lot of the ice, that demonstrates probably the fact that the current idea of a fixed radius of the globe of the Earth with we've got these very, very rigid constructs that describe the Earth's crust, the mantle, the core in a very literal way, as if we know anything, because honestly, we've only been like 16 kilometers into the crust, which is 60 kilometers deep. And then below that, we have no idea. We've never even gotten close. So all of the theories of hydrology, oil, where does oil come from? It's all wrong. Like, everything is based upon this very, very false model, which has these several plate tectonics just moving around, like sort of skimming the surface over like a lava sort of covering or something. No, I think that I've seen a lot of alternative, much healthier, I think, or responsible models that don't brush over paradoxes and demonstrate much more cohesion. and don't support like this idea of a Pangea, you know, some imaginary Pangea moment where everything with all the continents were together and then they separated. No. So I think that there are certain forbidden topics, and I don't understand the internal battles behind like what is allowed to be said or not said. I don't know what is known by the several Chinese or Russian outposts in Antarctica. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't believe the Earth is flat, if that's what you're getting at. But I do think that there's probably evidence under the ice of probably geological, maybe life, fossilized or other, you know. I'm not saying like living creatures or hollow earth. I'm not saying that either, which is probably what some of the Nazis believed. But you know, I find it all very fascinating. Let's just say that. And I don't find that there's collusion on everything. Like, I mean, the Chinese and the Russians will pay lip service to certain things like global warming theory, man-made global warming. I don't think, and I know that their scientists and their policymakers don't believe in what the IPCC has been telling us we have to believe in as a new religion of Gaia around this fear of carbon dioxide as the cause of climate change. They don't actually believe that. But I know that they will use language which involves sustainable development, involves an acceptance of the terms that have been created by the oligarchs of the West that they don't want to just say is a lie. Because if they open up that Pandora's box in public discourse, then you're basically acknowledging that there's you're basically saying that we acknowledge that there is an agenda to kill off everybody in the world and destroy civilizations, which means you're basically going to war. So they're using language and they're trying to redefine what sustainable means around nuclear power. They're like, okay, yeah, let's be sustainable. Sustainable development goals of China or Russia's leadership. If you look at how they're thinking about it versus Mark Carney or the technocrats of the West, they're like, oh yeah, let's okay, stop global warming. Well, let's build massive third, fourth generation nuclear power and invest in billions of dollars of fusion research to bring commercial fusion online. Let's do that. You want to be green? Let's green the Gobi Desert by moving, you know, abundant water from the south of China into the north and green deserts and create a ton of hydroelectric power along the way. And then that's their way of being green. Whereas our way of being green is let's shut down all of our nuclear power. Let's destroy. The West has destroyed, demolished in the last 20 years, something like 1,000 hydroelectric dams to save nature and liberate the deserts from the artificial constraints imposed by human technology. Totally different view. So they're trying to nudge these terms into natural law, whereas the oligarchy that generated these terms is trying to like pull us down into the abyss. So there's this is this sort of type of battle, or even the acknowledgement of pandemic when they say it, and they put out messaging in Eurasia around language that sounds sometimes similar on the medical pandemic front as what you hear Klaus Schwab saying. Then you look at what they do and how they're defining it. It's very different. You know, like they banned mRNA experimental jabs. They're you know, China especially has really made accessing hydroxychloroquine, zinc, other alternative remedies highly accessible and available for everybody, while keeping out the Pfizer mafia, the World Health Organization mafia, from determining what they do to their people. So there's been a big fight on those things, and they haven't been
just on that. How did they, at the start, where they were pretending everyone was just dropping on the street, which we know was a lie, how did that all orchestrated? Like,
well, that one. So I wrote a book called "Breaking Free of Anti-China Psyops," and my wife and I, we put this out, Cynthia and myself, and it's we have a chapter on that. And I think the way, what I've gathered is that something anomalous was released into China as well as into Iran early on, which was an anomalous pathogen, which had a very destructive effect on those who fell into it. And I think it was probably released by the American military at the Wuhan Games before Event 201. So there was something anomalous that was released that was targeted to the Han genotype, and also it disproportionately killed high-level Iranian military officials. If you remember, early on, it was like in the first several weeks, Iranian high-level military officials dropped dead from something, and Chinese, a lot of Chinese died, like just were keeling over, right? So people say, oh, the Iranians and the Chinese were lying and putting on a show on behalf of the World Health Organization. I disagree. I think something was released. It wasn't the thing we were told it was. The Chinese went on DEFCON 2, and I looked at all of the biolabs in South Korea run by the Pentagon, doing weaponized anthrax and all sorts of black plague. They're working on, all around China's perimeter. They've been releasing this stuff in drones as well, killing cattle and livestock, just like they've been doing in Russia's southern border. So I think that they freaked China out sufficiently that they did an overreaction to try to lock down. But then at that point, they kind of got played. I think the Chinese, the Iranians, and others got played, and then have been sort of trying to figure out, well, when is it possible that something that they know exists will be released onto them? And they've been sort of trying to keep a control in place to prepare for that type of asymmetrical war or attack that they're waiting for. It's only a matter of time, I think, in their minds. So that's how I see that early stage dropping of people.
I would like to add something. Sorry for interrupting. The situation is the following. I had the luck that I could talk to a real expert for viruses, a real one. And I asked her about China. And she said the Chinese has shot themselves in the knee because the biolabs in China are run several times by the Western governments and are diplomatic areas. And all the scientists have a diplomatic passport. So the Chinese are not allowed to enter these locations.
That's interesting.
And for this reason, they could spread something out and China couldn't do anything.
No, it's very interesting. I didn't know that. I would like to verify that, but that is an interesting consideration, Hartmut. I thank you.
You're welcome.
Just on the diplomatic,
it definitely exists in other
looking
countries.
at the diplomatic, just on the jab, because I was looking at different ways, because there's some organizations get you diplomatic passports and everything, and you were not able to get out of it with having been a diplomat. They were still putting as you were traveling and everything. So I was shocked at that. I thought, yeah, you get away from everything when you diplomatic status on your passport, but no.
Drago?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I didn't know that about China, what Hartmut said, but it's definitely true for other countries. Most of the research I did in the last 3 years since I started writing about it, not too often, but on occasionally I would write something about it. Every country that has hosted American-run biolabs actually turned them effectively into embassy-like areas where nobody has the access except the U.S. Personnel. So it's true for, I know it's true for Africa, for most of Africa, for some countries in South America, including Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. I think the only country in the world that hasn't allowed the U.S. to establish labs on its soil is Russia. But other countries with high levels of Russian population, especially Kazakhstan and Ukraine and the Baltic states, have actually allowed the establishment of biolabs close to the Russian border. And I know for a fact there are at least three biolabs in northern Kazakhstan where the Russian population is the majority in that area. So it's the same everywhere. And I know there was this Bulgarian investigative journalist. Her name is Dilyana Gaitanjieva, and she actually was in the European Parliament where she talked about it, and she was expelled from the European Parliament for spreading disinformation and false stuff, and I don't know what else, conspiracy theories and so on, as it was said. And it really, it's crazy how they keep doing this around the world and essentially forcing global powers like Russia and China to essentially hunker down and go to DEFCON 2, as Matt said.
And that kind of tells me for the public that initially they will always say it's a Chinese virus, Chinese virus. So every blame is towards China. And that's why you can't, because I understand that about that embassy too. You know, when you go to the different embassies in the Philippines, you can't just go in, even if it's in your country.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's officially the territory like of another country, so you can't even step foot on it without their permission. So
Mhm.
Yeah. Any last statements or words from you, Matthew, and
Yeah,
from everyone else, please?
yeah. I mean, I just on this whole line of considerations, I'll just toss out there Dr. Denis Rancourt, who is a Ottawa-based professor. Who you guys maybe he'll be willing to even come onto this show at some point. I know he's really busy, but he's a
Correct.
brilliant analyst. Have you spoken to him or looked at it?
Yeah, the minute that you had him, I invited him, but at that time his information was very fresh. So maybe
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I might reach out to him again.
Well, it's definitely he's put out some incredible, such important research through his think tank in Ottawa, and yeah, he's really demonstrated conclusively that there never was a pandemic. All of the increased deaths, like all of the because all basically the all-cause mortality was no different from any previous year on average, and even less in 2020 than it was in 2018. It was higher all-cause mortality. So if there was a pandemic, you would expect to see all-cause mortality having increased. Now, the only time the increase happened was after the rollout of the jibby jabbies. That's when you started actually getting a consistent, measurable increase of all-cause mortality. Before that, there was a spike early on in the first couple of months after the thing was announced. There was an anomalous spike in death, but that is entirely attributable to government responses to the thing that they were told it was, intubations, isolating old, fragile people, other things, not resuscitating people, like do not resuscitate orders. So that was murder, mass murder across the board of assets who were installed into decision-making positions within governments and forcing governments to do things that would ultimately kill their own people. But yeah, there was no thing. It was all, they just moved what you would normally consider to be seasonal flu over. They relabeled it. But it was entirely the jibby jabbies that with each dosage has now an increased rate of all sorts of nonlinear turbo cancers. As you guys know, I know you've talked about this with experts on your shows in the past, so I know that this is not news for your audience, but still, just to keep in mind, myocarditis, stillbirths, all sorts of babies coming out with problems. I mean, it's across the board. So Denis Rancourt's work is great. The whole discussion of biolabs, Wuhan, China releasing the thing to undermine Western civilization, it's all a giant Steve Bannon, neocon, intelligence agency, Knights of Malta psyop. Because at the end of the day, when I look at a lot of this stuff, at this point, I'm entirely looking at those Gnostic mystery cult orders that seeded the Knights of Malta when they were still called the Hospitaller to oversee the forever wars of the Crusades through, with the Templars who were doing their rituals under Solomon's temple and Solomon's mines, that infused themselves into the Masonic lodges that brought in the Royal Arch Freemasonic rituals, right, in the 19th century, that created earlier on the Scottish Rite coming out of Robert the Bruce and the whole Scottish Rite thing. That was also what seeded Rosicrucianism, that infused itself into France and then into England, and right. So that's the thing. That's what I'm looking at. And that operates with this left-hand, right-hand path of like, this alchemical manipulation of like male Apollonian energy on one hand, of the inquisitorial, burn the earth, destroy the weak type of logic of one grouping, and their response of the feminine, let's absorb, let's use the erotic passions of the night, right? That's how they label feminine energy, these and let's absorb and have that sort of Templar orgiastic thing on the other hand path in these false dichotomies. And that's how they always create the social controls in these institutions around these formulas, these alchemical formulas that are tied to this phoenix idea which is very, very deeply embedded in the Rosicrucian ethos, is the Phoenix purging moment to usher in a new age. In this case, it's the new age of Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris that they want to bring in. So that's the sort of thing that these fanatic, crazy people are animated by. And so I always have to sort of take. I think of the system that I'm a part of, right, as this layer of intentions. So you got different dynamics nested within each other, and the thing that they're afraid of is this thing that human beings have tended to do throughout history as a disruptive thing when we allow our minds and our morals to like harmonize, and these humans who mature that quality of themselves, we find in the case of these exceptional individuals who are able to make these impossible leaps of discoveries into the laws of the universe, and they have this creative power and moral caliber to navigate, like Benjamin Franklin did, is one great epigon of this, but there's so many, to break the formulas of this death cult. They got a very specific way that they want to arrange society under a master-slave hierarchy, and these figures, these exceptional individuals who are completely in alignment with natural law, break their formulas, and they bring online systems that are transgenerational, that offer the seeds to our salvation, because their idea of what constitutional law is, you read the founding documents of the American Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and you read the writings of those philosophers and statesmen who made that happen. It's so much more profound than people realize. We're given like such a dumbed down, simplistic version in our society. We don't realize what the nature of the fight was, or what Lincoln understood. The guy was dropping Shakespeare in the middle of his political speeches while he was fighting both the Scottish Rite of the northern jurisdiction around the abolitionists, and at the same time, the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite under Albert Pike. That's what Abraham Lincoln and his allies were fighting. Were both of these false opposition forces that both sought to undo the sovereign nation state system in 1860 and bring about global feudalism through the Civil War, right? And you had Tsar Alexander II in Russia, who had a very wise network of allies doing the same thing, battling against the oligarchical, the feudal families that wanted to hold on to the old ways in Russia, and he was fighting against those guys. They had their own theosophical. These are the creatures that created the Holy Brotherhood, or whatever it's called, the thing that seeded the Okhrana, right? That also ran the various anarchistic, Bolshevik, Bakunin, anarchistic, mystical organizations around Prince Kropotkin. So you had these groups working with those same feudal oligarchs, creating their own controlled revolutionary movements at the same time as they were trying to so-called support the royal family. They were never doing it. They always had, it's the left-hand, right-hand path, right? Masculine, feminine energy of the Bakunin feminine orgiastic communes of anarchism, which, by the way, infused is at the heart of libertarianism and the Austrian school. It's the same thing. Shh, don't tell anybody about that. And this royal this whole royalist, fake royalist, inquisitorial, masculine energy of penetrating, just imposing the will of the strong onto the weak. It was always a fake. So all that to say, the oligarchy is not in the immutable gods that they want to project onto us. They want us to be afraid of their absolute power of controlling everything. They're actually very insecure because of these things that humans have tended to do and organize around in all parts of civilization. And I think when you look at from that lens, what Xi Jinping is doing, what Putin is tapping into, what Trump tapped into, represents this deeper current that does frighten the oligarchy, which does give me a degree of optimism that I otherwise would not have right now, because we would all be dead. I think if Putin and Xi and other similar forces had not organized the way they did to pull the rug to a certain degree out from under the feet of their fifth columnists, we wouldn't be here right now having this conversation. I don't believe that.
We actually had figures in history like that before. And for example, Ivan the so-called Terrible, even though the word that's used in Russian actually means powerful or mighty, but the fact is they intentionally mistranslated that to make him sound like he was actually a terrible person. But actually, there was an oligarchy within Russia that was trying, or like a noble-based oligarchy that was trying to take control of the country and essentially destroy it in terms of a centralized power, which was the opposite of what Ivan was trying to do. So, and I think we see the same happening today. We have oligarchies trying to prevent the rise of sovereign leaders who are actually chosen by their people and loved by their people because they do the right thing, so that they could continue exploiting us or do whatever the hell they want to do. As you said, it's not all about the money. It's about all these death cults and the crazies that want to implement whatever the crazy crap they believe in. So,
Well, thank you very much, everyone. As we all know, we never run out of more topics. That's the spice of our existence in this moment, and I'm excited that we're part of it. And so, yes, Matthew, invite them again to all your projects and websites.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Right now, my big focus, my wife and I and our filmmaking, brilliant filmmaking producer friend, Jason Dahl, we just released our newest documentary 24 hours ago that I'm really trying to promote right now. I want to get people to watch it, sit down. There's a lot of heavy material in there. And it's called The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs, Episode 3. On the CIA, MK Ultra, and the new age of the sorcerers. We go deep. It's the longest documentary we've done yet in the series. The first one was about 29 minutes. The second one was 52 minutes. This one's an hour and 6 minutes. So I really want people to watch that, maybe watch the whole series, share it. There's going to be several more episodes to come in the coming months ahead. So these are labors of love. And also labors of hate, because I really hate what the oligarchy wants to do to create a new Gnostic, mystery religion of this new one world order of a new religious structure based upon alien gods that they're setting into play right now. And a lot of this will involve looking at the works of Carl Jung, who plays a much more directing role in this shit show than I even believed. I was shocked to see the role of Carl Jung as a guiding hand behind this entire operation that we've been living under since the earliest days of the Cold War, when he was an OSS operative with Alan Dulles as Alan Dulles' guru in Switzerland on psychological warfare. So anyway, that people could share that. Otherwise, my Substack, CanadianPatriot.org, and RisingTideFoundation.net. Those are my other websites that I manage with my wife. And we do events. And recently we just launched this American University in Moscow collaboration, where every 2 weeks we do roundtables. Maybe Drago, you'd like to come on. Actually, that'd be cool.
I would love to, of course.
Sweet, that'd be cool. Yeah. So on basically avoiding World War III. So people, if they want to register, just send me an email at info@risingtidefoundation.net or go to the Edward Lazansky website on American University in Moscow, and they could register and take part in those courses and talk every week to 3 or 4 experts in the field of history and geopolitics. We're even doing little course packs as well, and assignments for people if they want to really dig into things deeper. So that's fun. It's a new fun experiment. That's it.
Well, great job, everyone. And thank you to everything for what you do. And yes, powerful collaborations here and now. So, and please, to our audience, don't forget to remember to, share it. And even if Matthew didn't say it, but subscriptions, donations are always welcome in his platform, okay? Because, we all know that there's a lot of expenses when it comes to filmmaking, but it's all there free. And remember to follow Roy Coughlan in his Awakening podcast.
So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As mentioned at the start, you can find my 6 podcasts on roycoughlan.com or scan the QR code if you're looking to start a podcast or do a podcasting tour. I help with that. Also, if you're looking for a virtual assistant, we also have that service. And you can help the show by visiting the store, supporting our sponsors, or making a donation. Until next week, take care.